On a freezing November night in Montana, a widowed soldier named Marcus Sullivan found a dog sleeping on his porch. He had nothing, no job, no home, barely enough to survive another week. But when he read the tag around the dog's neck, everything stopped. It belonged to his old military unit, the one he'd left behind after the worst day of his life. He didn't know why the dog was there or who sent it, but what he did next, and what he discovered because of it, would change everything. This is the story of a man who lost it all, a dog who wouldn't let him fall, and the hidden connection that brought them both back home. The cold came early that year to Pinewood, Montana, settling into the valleys like an unwelcome guest that had no intention of leaving. By mid-November, the trees had long since given up their leaves, and the sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of snow that hadn't yet fallen. It was the kind of cold that seeped through walls, through coats, through skin, and made its home in your bones. Marcus Sullivan stood outside the Riverside lumber mill just after sunset, his breath visible in the dim light, his hands raw from 8 hours of stacking timber in freezing air. He was 32, but looked older. The kind of older that didn't come from years, but from weight. The weight of loss, the weight of surviving when someone you loved didn't. He pulled his jacket tighter, though it didn't help much. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, and the zipper had broken weeks ago. He'd tied it shut with a piece of cord. It wasn't dignity, but it worked. Marcus had learned a long time ago that working was all that mattered now. Not comfort, not rest. Just forward motion, one shift at a time, one paycheck stretched as far as it could go. His truck, a rusted Chevy from the late 90s, groaned to life after 3 tries. The heater rattled but didn't blow warm. Still, he let the engine run for a moment, staring through the cracked windshield at nothing in particular. There was a time when coming home meant something, when Sarah would be waiting with dinner on the stove and that laugh that could pull him out of any darkness. But Sarah had been gone for 2 years now. Cancer, swift and cruel, and the home they'd built together had been sold to cover the medical bills that insurance wouldn't touch. Now, Marcus lived in a single-wide trailer at the edge of town, tucked into a lot where the rent was cheap because the place was barely livable. No insulation, a leaky roof, a door that didn't lock properly. But it had 4 walls and kept most of the wind out, and that was more than some people had. He drove slowly through town, past the diner where he used to take Sarah on Fridays, past the church they were married in, past the park where they'd talked about having kids someday. Pinewood wasn't a cruel place. It just wasn't kind either. It was small and indifferent, the kind of town where people knew your name but didn't ask too many questions, and Marcus preferred it that way. When he pulled into the gravel lot of the trailer park, the sky had turned a deeper shade of gray, almost purple, and the first stars were beginning to pierce through. His headlights swept across the narrow path to his trailer, and that's when he saw it. A dog, lying on the wooden porch, curled into itself against the cold. Marcus cut the engine and sat there for a moment, unsure. Dogs didn't just show up out here. The trailer park didn't allow pets, and the nearest neighbor was a 1/4 mile down the road. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching on frozen gravel, and approached carefully. The dog didn't move. For a brief, horrible second, Marcus thought it might be dead. But then its ear twitched, then its head lifted, just slightly, and a pair of dark, tired eyes met his. It was a Belgian Malinois, lean, muscular, with a tan and black coat that looked dull and matted from travel. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, just watched him with a stillness that felt almost human. Marcus crouched down a few feet away, his heart doing something strange in his chest. And that's when he saw it. A green canvas collar around the dog's neck, military grade, and hanging from it, a single metal tag, scratched and worn, but still legible under the porch light. He leaned closer, hands trembling now, and read the words stamped into the metal. Ranger, 3rd Infantry Division, K9 Unit. The air left Marcus's lungs all at once. His vision blurred, his hands went numb. That was his unit, his old unit, the one he'd left 5 years ago and never looked back. Marcus didn't move for a long time. He just stared at the tag, reading the words over and over, as if they might change or disappear if he blinked. But they didn't. The metal stayed cold and real in his hand, and the dog, Ranger, stayed still beneath his touch, watching him with those quiet, knowing eyes. His mind raced backward, pulling him into memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Afghanistan, the heat, the dust, the weight of his rifle, and the heavier weight of responsibility. He'd been a staff sergeant in the K-9 unit, working alongside handlers and their dogs on patrol, on searches, on missions that required more than just firepower. He'd seen those dogs save lives. He'd seen them lose their own. And he'd left it all behind after Sarah got sick. An honorable discharge, a quiet exit, no fanfare, no goodbye, just a signed paper and a long flight home to a life that was falling apart faster than he could hold it together. Marcus exhaled slowly and looked back at Ranger. The dog's ribs were visible beneath his coat, and there were cuts on his paws like he'd been traveling for days, maybe weeks. But how? And why here? Why now? He turned the tag over, and on the back, scratched in smaller letters, was a phone number. No name, just 10 digits, faint but readable. Marcus pulled out his phone, a prepaid flip model with a cracked screen, and stared at the number. His thumb hovered over the keys. Part of him wanted to call right then, to demand answers, to understand what kind of cruel coincidence or deliberate act had brought this dog to his doorstep. But another part of him, the part that had learned to survive by staying small and invisible, told him to walk away, to call animal control, to let someone else handle it. He looked at Ranger again. The dog hadn't moved, but his eyes hadn't left Marcus either. There was something in that gaze, not pleading, not desperate, just steady, like he'd been sent to find someone, and he had. Marcus made a decision. He stood, walked to his truck, and pulled out the old blanket he kept behind the seat. It smelled like oil and dirt, but it was warm. He brought it back to the porch, knelt down, and wrapped it gently around Ranger's shoulders. The dog leaned into the touch just slightly, and for the first time in 2 years, Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain, not exactly, but something close to it. "All right, boy," Marcus said quietly. "Let's figure out where you're supposed to be." He pulled out his phone again and dialed the number. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, low and rough, like gravel under boots. "This is Hayes." Marcus hesitated. "Yeah, I found a dog. Says he's from the 3rd Infantry, K-9 unit. Tag has this number on it." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice came back, sharper now, more focused. "You found Ranger?" "That's what the tag says. Where are you?" "Pinewood, Montana." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "I need you to bring him to me." Marcus frowned. "Who is this?" "Colonel Vincent Hayes. Retired. I run a program for military working dogs. Ranger was supposed to be en route to a handler in Wyoming, but the transport got delayed and he got out. We've been looking for him for 3 days. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Wyoming's not close." "No, it's not." Hayes's voice softened just a little. "But if you can get him to me, I'll make sure you're covered. Gas, food, whatever you need. I'm about 40 miles north of you, up in the mountains, a place called Meadowbrook Ranch. It's a retreat center for vets. You can bring him tonight or first thing tomorrow. Just, please. He's important." Marcus looked at Ranger again. The dog had closed his eyes now, finally resting, his breathing slow and even under the blanket. 40 miles, up into the mountains, in a truck with no heat and barely enough gas to make it. He should have said no. Should have told Hayes to send someone else, should have protected the little he had left. But he didn't. "I'll bring him tonight," Marcus said. And before Hayes could respond, Marcus hung up, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and gently scooped Ranger into his arms. The dog didn't resist. He just rested his head against Marcus's chest, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was carrying something that mattered. The road north wound like a scar through the mountains, narrow and unforgiving, with sharp turns that appeared suddenly in the dark and edges that dropped off into nothing. Marcus drove slowly, both hands gripping the wheel, his eyes straining against the weak throw of his headlights. The truck shuddered with every gust of wind, and the engine made a sound he didn't trust, a high whine that came and went like a warning he couldn't quite interpret. Ranger lay across the passenger seat, still wrapped in the blanket, his head resting near the window. He hadn't made a sound since they left, but every so often his ears would twitch, responding to something Marcus couldn't hear. The dog's presence filled the cab in a way that was hard to explain. Not intrusive, just there. Solid. Real. Like proof that Marcus wasn't as alone as he'd convinced himself he was. The heater still didn't work, and the cold crept in through every gap in the metal frame. Marcus's fingers ached from gripping the wheel, and his breath came out in thin clouds that hung in the air before fading. He hadn't eaten since lunch, a gas station sandwich he'd split into 2 meals, and his stomach had started to complain an hour ago. But he kept driving. The GPS on his phone had lost signal 20 minutes back, but Hayes had given him directions over the phone before Marcus left. Stay on Route 14 until you see the wooden sign for Meadowbrook. Turn left. Follow the gravel road about 3 miles. You'll see the lights. Marcus found the sign just after 9 o'clock, half hidden by overgrown pine branches, the wood weathered and split but still legible. He turned onto the gravel road, and the truck bounced hard over ruts and rocks, the suspension groaning in protest. Ranger lifted his head, alert now, his ears forward. Then the lights appeared. Warm, golden, spilling out from the windows of a large lodge-style building set back against the trees, with smaller cabins scattered around it like satellites. A wooden fence ran along the property, and beyond it, Marcus could see open fields, dark now, but wide and peaceful. He pulled up to the main building and cut the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, taking it in. This place didn't look like something temporary. It looked like something built to last, to hold people, to give them space to breathe. The front door opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his early 60s, with silver hair cut military short and a lined face that had seen too much but hadn't hardened from it. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and when he saw the truck, his expression shifted. Relief. Unmistakable and immediate. Marcus opened the door and carefully lifted Ranger out. The dog's weight was familiar now, and Marcus carried him toward the porch without hesitation. Hayes came down the steps, his eyes on the dog, and when he got close enough, he reached out and ran a hand gently over Ranger's head. The dog's tail wagged, just once, slow but certain. "Thank God," Hayes said, his voice thick. "I didn't think we'd find him." Marcus set Ranger down gently on the porch, and the dog immediately moved toward Hayes, leaning against his leg. Hayes crouched down, checking him over with practiced hands, paws, ribs, eyes, ears, muttering softly the whole time. "You're all right, boy. You're all right." Then he looked up at Marcus, and his expression changed. Gratitude, yes. But something else, too. Recognition, maybe. Or just the understanding that came from seeing someone who'd been where you'd been. "You drove all the way up here in that truck?" Hayes asked, nodding toward the Chevy. Marcus shrugged. "It made it." Hayes stood, extended a hand. "Vincent Hayes, but most people just call me Hayes." Marcus shook it. "Marcus Sullivan." Hayes's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspiciously, but with interest. "Sullivan, you serve?" "Yeah, Staff Sergeant, 3rd Infantry." Hayes's expression softened. "Same unit as Ranger." Marcus nodded but didn't elaborate. Hayes seemed to understand. "Come inside," Hayes said. "Get warm. I'll get you something to eat and then I'll give you a ride back if—" "No need," Marcus said quickly, taking a step back. "I just wanted to make sure he got here safe." Hayes frowned. "It's late, it's freezing. At least let me—" "I'm good," Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Really?" He turned and walked back to the truck before Hayes could argue. He didn't look back, didn't let himself. The drive home was colder, lonelier. And when Marcus finally pulled into the trailer park just after midnight, he found a yellow eviction notice taped to his door. Final notice. Vacate by 1 no exceptions. He stared at it for a long time, the paper fluttering in the wind, and then he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The trailer was dark, empty, and colder than the night outside. Marcus didn't sleep that night, not really. He lay on the narrow cot that served as his bed, staring up at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the thin metal walls of the trailer. The eviction notice sat on the small table near the door, its presence like a weight pressing down on his chest even from across the room. He'd known it was coming. The rent had been late twice before, and the landlord, a man named Garrett who owned half the trailer park and didn't care much for excuses, had made it clear there wouldn't be a third chance. Marcus had tried. He'd worked every shift the mill would give him, had skipped meals to stretch his paycheck further, had even sold the last things Sarah had left behind: her wedding ring, her grandmother's necklace, a box of books she'd loved. It still hadn't been enough. By the time the sun rose, pale and hesitant through the frost-covered window, Marcus had already made his decision. There was no point in fighting it, no point in begging. He'd pack what little he had, find somewhere else to sleep, and keep moving. That's what he'd been doing for 2 years, moving, never stopping long enough to feel the full weight of what he'd lost. He rolled up his sleeping bag, stuffed his clothes into a duffel bag, and gathered the few items that mattered: a photo of Sarah, his discharge papers, and a battered copy of a book she used to read to him when the nightmares got bad. Everything else he left behind. By 8 o'clock, Marcus was standing outside the lumber mill, waiting for his supervisor to arrive. When the man finally pulled up, Marcus walked over and handed him the keys to the equipment locker. "I can't make it in today," Marcus said quietly. "Or any more, actually." The supervisor, a gruff man named Carl who'd always been fair, looked at him with something close to sympathy. "You all right, Sullivan?" Marcus nodded, though they both knew it was a lie. "Yeah, just need to figure some things out." Carl didn't push. He just nodded, clapped Marcus on the shoulder once and said, "You need a reference, you call me." Marcus thanked him and walked away before the conversation could go any further. He spent the rest of the morning driving aimlessly through Pinewood, the truck's gas gauge creeping lower with every mile. He passed the library, the post office, the grocery store where he used to shop with Sarah. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. By noon, he found himself parked outside the Iron Pine Diner, a small roadside spot on the edge of town where truckers and locals gathered for cheap coffee and breakfast that lasted all day. Marcus had eaten there a few times, back when he could afford to. The owner, a woman named Dolly, was the kind of person who remembered faces and didn't ask too many questions. He sat in the truck for a while, debating whether to go inside. He had maybe $12 left, enough for coffee and toast. Maybe. When he finally walked in, the warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of bacon and fresh bread. Dolly was behind the counter, wiping down the surface with a rag, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. She looked up when the door chimed and smiled. "Marcus, honey. Haven't seen you in a while." He nodded, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "Been busy." She poured him a cup of coffee without asking and set it in front of him. "On the house," she said before he could protest. He wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into his fingers. For a long moment he just sat there, staring into the dark liquid, trying to remember the last time someone had done something kind for him without expecting anything in return. And Dolly leaned against the counter, studying him with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen her share of people on the edge. "You look like you could use more than coffee." Marcus shook his head. "I'm all right." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push either. Instead, she disappeared into the kitchen and came back a few minutes later with a plate, scrambled eggs, toast, hash browns, and 2 strips of bacon. "Dolly, don't," she said firmly, setting the plate down in front of him. "Just eat." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her he didn't need charity. But the truth was, he did. And he was too tired to pretend otherwise. So he ate, slowly, quietly. And when he was done, Dolly refilled his coffee and leaned in a little closer. "You got a place to stay tonight?" Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. Dolly sighed, but not unkindly. "There's a storage room in the back. Got a couch that's older than me, but it's warm and it locks. You can stay there till you figure things out. Just don't make a habit of it." Marcus looked up at her, his throat tight. "I can't." "You can," she said simply, "and you will." And so he did. That night, Marcus lay on the worn couch in the back room of the diner, surrounded by boxes of supplies and the faint hum of the walk-in cooler. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. And for the first time in days, he let himself close his eyes. Somewhere, miles away, Ranger slept too. And Hayes sat at his desk, staring at a phone number scrawled on a slip of paper, wondering if he should call. Marcus woke to the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen and the low hum of the morning rush. Sunlight leaked through the gap under the storage room door, thin and pale, and for a moment he forgot where he was. Then it all came back. The eviction, the drive, the couch that smelled faintly of grease and coffee grounds. He sat up slowly, his back stiff, and ran a hand over his face. The room was warmer than the trailer had ever been, and for that he was grateful. But gratitude didn't change the fact that he was a 32-year-old man sleeping in a storage closet behind a diner, with no job, no home, and no clear path forward. He folded the blanket Dolly had left for him, straightened the couch as best he could, and stepped out into the kitchen. Dolly was at the stove, flipping pancakes with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She glanced over her shoulder when she heard him. "Morning. Coffee's fresh? Help yourself." Marcus poured a cup and stood by the back door, watching the town come to life through the small window. Trucks rolled by. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The world kept moving, indifferent to whether he was part of it or not. He was halfway through his second cup when the front door chimed, and Dolly called out from the dining area. "Marcus, someone here to see you?" He frowned. No one knew he was here, no one except Dolly. He stepped out into the diner, and there, standing near the counter in a heavy canvas jacket and worn jeans, was Hayes. The older man's eyes found Marcus immediately, and something like relief crossed his face. "There you are." Marcus set his cup down slowly. "How did you—" "Small town," Hayes said simply. "I called around. Dolly's one of the few people who'd take someone in without asking questions." He nodded toward a booth by the window. "Can we talk?" Marcus hesitated, then followed him over. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Hayes looked tired, but there was a steadiness in his gaze that reminded Marcus of the officers he'd served under, the kind who didn't waste words. "I wanted to thank you again," Hayes said, "for bringing Ranger back. That dog means a lot to a lot of people." Marcus nodded. "He seemed important." "He is." Hayes leaned forward slightly, folding his hands on the table. "But that's not the only reason I'm here." Marcus waited. "I did some asking around after you left," Hayes continued. "Found out you served in the same unit Ranger came from. Found out you've been struggling since you got back." He paused. "Found out you got evicted." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not your business." "You're right. It's not." Hayes' voice was calm, no judgment in it. "But I'm making it my business anyway." Marcus looked away, out the window, his hands curling into fists on his lap. "Meadowbrook isn't just a retreat center," Hayes said. "It's a place for veterans who need time to figure things out. We've got cabins, work programs, counseling if you want it. No pressure, no strings. Just a place to land." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Hayes said firmly. "It's a hand up. There's a difference." "I brought your dog back because it was the right thing to do," Marcus said, his voice low. "Not because I wanted something in return." Hayes nodded. "I know. That's exactly why I'm offering." Marcus finally looked at him, and Hayes met his gaze without flinching. "You drove 40 miles in a truck that barely runs, in the freezing cold, to return a dog you didn't know, to a man you'd never met," Hayes said. "You didn't ask for gas money, didn't ask for food, didn't ask for anything. You just did it." He leaned back. "That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Marcus's throat felt tight. He wanted to say no, wanted to walk away, the same way he'd walked away from everything else that reminded him of who he used to be. But something in Hayes' eyes stopped him. Not pity, not obligation, just recognition. One soldier seeing another. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said carefully, "but I don't think I'm the kind of person you're looking for." Hayes smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." He stood, pulled a business card from his pocket, and set it on the table. "If you change your mind, call me. The offer doesn't expire." And with that, he turned and walked out, the door chiming softly behind him. Marcus sat there for a long time, staring at the card. On the front was Hayes's name, a phone number, and the words, Meadowbrook Ranch, a place to heal.
No.
He slipped it into his pocket, finished his coffee, and told himself he wouldn't call. But he didn't throw the card away either. 2 days passed, then 3. Marcus spent them in a kind of limbo, sleeping on Dolly's couch at night and wandering the town during the day, looking for work that didn't exist and purpose that felt further away with every passing hour. He'd check the job boards at the community center, sit on benches outside closed storefronts, and watch the world move around him like he was a ghost passing through it. The card stayed in his pocket. He'd pull it out sometimes, turn it over in his hands, read the words again, even though he'd memorized them by now. But he never called. Calling felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to admit, that he couldn't do this alone, that he needed help, that he was drowning. On the 4th morning, Marcus woke to the sound of voices in the diner, Dolly's, familiar and warm, and another, deeper, calm. He sat up, already knowing before he stepped out of the storage room. Hayes was back. He sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, talking quietly with Dolly, who had her arms crossed but was smiling in that way she did when she approved of someone. When Marcus appeared in the doorway, Hayes turned and his expression didn't change. No surprise, no frustration, just patience. "Morning, Marcus." Marcus didn't respond right away. He just stood there, feeling cornered in a way that had nothing to do with the physical space. Dolly excused herself, disappearing into the kitchen with a knowing look, and Hayes gestured to the stool beside him. "Sit, please." Marcus did slowly, his guard still up. Hayes took a sip of his coffee, then set the mug down gently. "I'm not here to pressure you," he said, "but I am here to tell you something I should have said the first time." Marcus waited. Hayes turned to face him fully now, and his voice dropped, quieter but weighted with something personal. "I lost my son 8 years ago. He was a Marine, deployed 3 times, came home the last time and couldn't find his footing. Couldn't sleep, couldn't work, couldn't ask for help." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. He took his own life 6 months after he got back. Marcus's breath caught. He didn't know what to say. Didn't know if there was anything to say. "I started Meadowbrook because of him," Hayes continued. "Because I couldn't save him. But maybe I could help save someone else." He looked Marcus directly in the eyes. "When you showed up that night with Ranger, I saw him, the same look, the same quiet, the same pride that wouldn't let him admit he was struggling." Marcus's hands clenched on the counter. "I'm not your son." "No," Hayes said. "You're not. But you're someone's son, someone's husband, someone who served and sacrificed and came home to a world that didn't make space for you." His voice softened. "And you don't have to keep doing this alone." Marcus looked away, his chest tight, his eyes burning. "I don't know how to do anything else." "I know," Hayes said. "That's why I'm here."
No.
He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, setting it on the counter between them. "This isn't a contract, it's not a job offer, it's just an invitation. Come stay at Meadowbrook. No rent, no expectations, just a place to rest while you figure out what's next." Marcus stared at the paper but didn't touch it. "There's a cabin ready for you," Hayes said. "It's small, but it's yours. And Ranger's been asking about you." Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" Hayes smiled faintly. "He won't settle. Keeps waiting by the door like he's expecting someone." "I think he knows." Something cracked in Marcus's chest. He thought of the dog's quiet eyes, the weight of him in his arms, the way Ranger had leaned into him like he'd been waiting his whole life to find someone who understood. Marcus picked up the paper, unfolded it. Inside was a hand-drawn map to Meadowbrook, a cabin number, and a single sentence written at the bottom in careful script. "You're not an inconvenience. You're welcome here." His vision blurred, his throat closed, and for the first time in 2 years, Marcus let himself break, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, in the way that only happens when someone finally tells you it's okay to stop carrying everything alone. When he could speak again, his voice was rough. "I don't have anything to offer." "You already did," Hayes said. "You brought him home?" Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a shaky breath, and nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll come." Hayes smiled, real and warm, and clapped him gently on the shoulder. "Good. Let's get you home." Hayes led him to a small cabin tucked beneath a stand of pine trees, its wood freshly stained, a stone chimney rising from the roof, and a porch that overlooked the open fields beyond. It wasn't much, but it was whole. It was warm. And when Marcus stepped inside and saw the bed made with clean linens, the wood stove already lit, and a basket of food on the table, he had to steady himself against the doorframe. "Take your time settling in," Hayes said from the doorway. "No rush, no schedule. Just rest." Marcus nodded, unable to find the words. Hayes started to leave, then paused. "Oh, one more thing." He stepped aside, and there, sitting calmly on the porch, was Ranger. The dog's ears perked up the moment he saw Marcus, and his tail began to wag, slow at first, then faster. He stood, walked into the cabin without hesitation, and sat directly at Marcus's feet, looking up at him with those same steady, knowing eyes. Marcus crouched down, his hand reaching out instinctively, and Ranger leaned into him, pressing his weight against Marcus's chest the way he had that first night. And this time, Marcus didn't pull away. He wrapped his arms around the dog and held on. Hayes smiled from the doorway. "He's been waiting for you." And then he left them alone. The weeks that followed were quiet, but not empty. Marcus began to fall into a rhythm at Meadowbrook, helping with morning chores, repairing fences, chopping wood, small tasks that gave him purpose without overwhelming him. He attended a few of the group sessions Hayes ran for other veterans, though mostly he just listened. Hearing other men talk about the same things he'd felt but never named made him realize he wasn't as alone as he'd thought. Ranger stayed by his side constantly. The dog had chosen him, and Marcus had stopped questioning why. They walked the property together every morning, Ranger trotting ahead but always circling back to check on him. At night, Ranger slept at the foot of Marcus's bed, a quiet presence that made the dark feel less heavy. One evening, as Marcus sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Hayes joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. "You've been here almost 2 months, Hayes said, handing him a mug. "How are you feeling?" Marcus thought about it. "Like I can breathe again." Hayes nodded. "Good, because I want to talk to you about something." Marcus glanced over, cautious but curious. "We've been getting more requests than we can handle," Hayes said. "Veterans who need a place like this. And I've been thinking about expanding, building more cabins, bringing in more dogs, creating programs that pair them with guys who need them." He paused. "I could use someone who understands both sides, someone who's been where they are, someone they'd trust." Marcus set his mug down slowly. "You want me to stay?" "I want you to help me build something," Hayes said. "Not just for you. For all of them." Marcus looked out at the fields, at the other cabins scattered across the property, at the mountains rising quiet and strong in the distance. He thought about the men he'd met here, men who'd served, who'd lost, who'd survived, and were trying to figure out what came next. He thought about Ranger and the way a single act of returning him had led to all of this. "I'm not a counselor," Marcus said quietly. "You don't need to be," Hayes replied. "You just need to show up. That's all any of them need." Marcus was silent for a long moment, then he nodded. "All right, I'm in." Over the next year, Marcus became an integral part of Meadowbrook. He helped design new programs, worked directly with incoming veterans, and trained alongside handlers to better understand the dogs who would be paired with them. He and Hayes launched the Ranger's Promise Initiative, a program that rescued retired military working dogs and matched them with veterans who needed them most. Marcus still had hard days, days when the grief came back sharp and sudden, when Sarah's absence felt like a wound that wouldn't close. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had purpose, he had Ranger, and he had a community of people who understood that healing wasn't linear. It was just showing up one day at a time. One afternoon, as Marcus stood in the main lodge helping a young vet fill out paperwork for his new service dog, he glanced out the window and saw Ranger lying in the grass, watching him. The dog's tail wagged once, slow and sure. Marcus smiled. Sometimes you don't find home. It finds you. And sometimes all it takes is one cold night, one tired dog, and the courage to keep going when everything tells you to stop. Because the people who need you most are often the ones you didn't know you were looking for. If this story moved you, join us in honoring the heroes, both human and canine, who serve and sacrifice. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of courage, loyalty, and second chances.